Hello, and welcome to this week's Bible study. As always, I like to start out with 3 deep breaths, so if you wouldn't mind doing that with me right now. So deep breath in, out. Okay, so after the deep breathing, I like to listen to a quiet worship song in order to get into that meditative learning headspace. I obviously can't play it here for copyright reasons, but if you go into the description of this video, if you're on YouTube, there will be a link for a quiet worship song right at the top, and you can leave this video and go listen to that, and then come back when you're done. Alright? And if you're on Facebook, you can just scroll down. But for those on YouTube, you can just pause the video and listen to that song. And then you come back. Does that sound like a plan? I think it sounds like a plan. So a good time to pause the video to do that would be right now. And you're back. I hope you had a lovely time listening to that song. It was a little bit more upbeat. It's one of those weird songs where you're like, I guess this is like, it's not exactly quiet worship, but it's not exactly loud worship either. So it's one of those in between songs. I went with quiet worship for that one because I had a harder time finding a quiet worship song for this one. So I went with quiet worship. So after quiet worship, I like to do a little I don't know the word for it, but it's a pre-written prayer. And I'm going to do that now. So, God, thank you for bringing us all here tonight. Please guide my tongue and heart during this teaching and guide everyone during the discussion and prayer time. Help us to be a reflection of your light by enlightening us to your ways with love, patience, and curiosity. We love you, God. Help us to love each other like you love us. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so now we're going to get into the Bible study part. This is actually going to be the last of the amplified translations that we do, so that's very exciting. So without further ado, let's just jump into this. So Genesis 15 starts out. Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She gave birth to Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Letushim, and Lemim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were the sons of Keturah. Okay, so quick note before we get into the meat of this one. I just wanted to point out that this is our first introduction to the founder of the Midianites. Midian, son of Keturah and Abraham. The other sons of Keturah have their bits of history, but biblically speaking, the Midians make the most appearances. Moses' wife was Midian, as were the traders who sold Joseph, king of dreams, into slavery. And by a fun twist of events, the Midianites became one of Israel's more prominent enemies. I suppose we could wax poetic about how 2 half-brothers would become enemies. History's ever-continuing cycle of peace and war, but I mostly just wanted to point out where the Midians came from. They came from Midian. So yeah. But moving on from that. So horny old man Abe took another wife, There is a bit of debate around this Keturah woman. Some Jewish scholars think it's actually Hagar renamed, possibly brought back by Isaac, which would explain his attachment to Hagar's well. Perhaps she reformed herself into more of a stoic woman. Hagar means flight, whereas Keturah means bound. So perhaps Hagar wanted to show how dedicated she was to Abraham by renaming herself. It likely helps that Sarah was out of the picture too. I don't totally discount this theory, but I, along with other Christian scholars, are skeptical of it. They do seem to be presented as two different people in the text to start with. There's also some debate as to when Abraham remarried, partially because Keturah, as we'll see in the next verse, is occasionally referred to as a concubine, not a second wife, implying Abraham was still married to Sarah when Keturah joined them. And having 6 more kids after you're a 140-year-old man seems slightly impossible. They did get married. If they did get married before Sarah died, it certainly couldn't have been Hagar, though, who Sarah absolutely despises. And if Hagar waited until Sarah died to come back, she definitely would have been too old to squeeze out 6 more kids. So it seems a lot more likely that Pimp Daddy Abraham had 2 different wives / concubines outside of Sarah. And that's possibly why Jewish scholars don't really want Abraham to have another wife. That's their kind of motivations for having this theory, is because it's like, oh, not only did he have Hagar, going against God's plan, he then had like another wife outside of that. And I think they kind of wanted him to kind of stick to just the 2, but no, there's 3 actually. So there you go. So let's see how he treated these concubines, plural, of his in the next verse. Now Abraham gave everything that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Hagar and Keturah, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them to the east country, away from Isaac, his son of promise. So, it's tradition to give your true wife's kids, the main wife's kids, all the inheritance, but leave your concubine's kids with a little gifty poo, which we see Abraham doing now. He also sends the more illegitimate kids away from his heir, Isaac, mainly because he is the one that's supposed to get the promised land. The secondary sons may try to use their ties to Abraham to claim it for themselves, and it could cause a lot of mess and confusion for Isaac and his descendants down the line. It is the smart thing to do, and I wish it had worked, but unfortunately that spot of land seems to be cursed with greed by all who occupy it, especially if they're a descendant of Abraham, which like half the world is, it seems. But almost makes you wonder, though, if Abraham only did have the one wife, if maybe there wouldn't be as much contention in Israel, at least. We'll never know for sure, of course, but it is an example of how messy polygamy can get, at least when there's like a big inheritance to get from it. Anyways, let's move on to the next verse, see what Abraham did next. So the days of Abraham's life were 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man who was satisfied with life, and he was gathered to his people who had preceded him in death. So his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is east of Mamre. I like how they're specific, like, hey, this was ours. Remember this field, this specific cave is ours. That makes more sense if you've watched the previous videos, which I hope you have. Anyways, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth There, Abraham was buried with Sarah, his wife. Now, after the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived at Beer Lahai Roi, which, as you'll remember, is Hagar's well. And so ends an era. Abraham of course, holds great reverence among the writers, obviously because he was the founder of God's chosen people. The only person in the Bible more referenced than him is Moses, and of course, the writers would favor Moses a little bit more. You know, the nerds love a good lawmaker, but the father of the Jews will always hold a special place in our hearts and minds, a true friend of God. And how bittersweet to see the two half-brothers, once at odds, come together to bury their father. If only that camaraderie could last beyond their generation. But alas, it was not to be. But let's continue and see what these descendants got up to. You know, the verse continues. Now these are the records of the descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the 12 sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their births. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, Abdil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tamah, Jetur, and Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their settlements and by their encampments. 12 princes, or sheiks, according to their tribes. Ishmael lived 137 years. Then he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people who had preceded him in death. Ishmael's sons and descendants settled from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt, as one goes towards Assyria. He settled east, opposite of all his relatives. So we can see God kept his promise from the well and gave Ishmael those 12 princes, if you'll recall that promise. They all went off to build empires, great empires, you know, some stronger than others, but collectively impressive in their own rights regardless, and had great financial success and cultural influence as time went on. But though they got their physical blessings of this world, none got the honor of being the catalyst and surrogate for the Messiah. Only Isaac's descendants held that honor. But it's an honor that would inevitably be shared with the world. After Jesus' resurrection, everyone who so chose could be considered God's chosen people. But for now, only Isaac's line matters, or especially matters. So let's see what he got up to in the next verse. Now these are the records of the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, or Syrian, of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was unable to conceive children. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived twins. So interesting that Rebekah also had some issues producing children. Isaac perhaps wondered if God was going to make him and Rebekah also wait until they were pushing 100 before letting them conceive. It may have been a relief when Rebekah got pregnant 20 years into the marriage, as opposed to the at least 50 years that Abraham and Sarah had to wait. One has to wonder why God had them wait at all. With Abraham and Sarah, it was mostly like flexing, just showing what God could do, and also trying to push that messianic metaphor. This doesn't seem as necessary for Isaac and Rebekah, as the point had already been made with the parents. But maybe God wanted to give this new couple a taste of the patience and humility that Abraham and Sarah had to endure. Maybe give them that perspective and respect their elders a little bit more. Or maybe God really, like, maybe God wanted them to, like, really want these kids and not take them for granted. Maybe it was just good fatherly bonding for Abraham to guide this younger couple through this and encourage them. He died about 15 years after the twins were born, if my math is right. And sometimes it's not, so double check that. But I know he was alive when the twins were born, so there's that. But it is often nice to have older people around who have gone through similar things you've you're currently going through and have come out of the other side. It can give both the old and young new perspectives. The young know that their trial is temporary, and the old know that their trial was helpful not just for them, but for others as well, because it can be used as an example. And there's more people to celebrate with when your prayers finally do get answered. So that's lots of reasons for this to be a reason why this happened. I'm sure Abraham was happy to know, either way, that his line would continue as God had promised before he died. It was a real blessing all around. But perhaps Rebecca didn't feel like it was much of a blessing when she did finally get pregnant, as we'll see in the next verse, which is, "But the children struggled together within her, kicking and shoving one another. And she said, 'If it is so that the Lord has heard our prayer, why then am I this way?' So she went to inquire of the Lord, praying for an answer. The Lord said to her, 'The founders of two nations are in your womb, and the separation of the two nations has begun in your body. The one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.'" So Rebecca likely didn't know that she was having twins, since ultrasounds didn't exist back then. So it's probably a comfort to hear that there were two babies in her, and that's maybe why she felt like there was a war zone going on in her stomach. Though God's reply was a little cryptic, so maybe she also thought that she was going to have a second kid from a separate pregnancy, and that kid was going to get into beef with this absolutely wild first kid. But I'm sure she at least figured it out when the kids were born. So I do wonder how she felt as a mother, hearing that her kids would be somewhat rivals of each other. I suppose sibling rivalries weren't all that uncommon in those days, when inheritance was everything. I also think it's interesting that God doesn't specify who the stronger one is in the prophecy, though it's clear that the youngest will rule the oldest. As we'll see, the oldest is physically stronger, but the youngest is mentally stronger. But since it's the youngest that gains power over the oldest, it can be assumed that the mental strength and ability is more valuable than the physical type. But people reading this prophecy might often assume that it's the physically strong that would gain that power. So I lost my place. But reading prophecy, people want to assume would gain the power. So the younger must be the physically stronger. So what a lesson to find that it's the more clever yet physically weaker brother that wins the day. I think it also shows how God acknowledges that both brothers will be strong in their own way, but one will ultimately be stronger than the other in a way that is strategically advantageous, and it might not be the one that everyone would assume it would be. On another note, some commentators think that this is God's will for these boys to be at odds with each other, like God is making them that way. I personally view it as more of a prediction than a coercion. Free will is still a thing, which is generally accepted and respected by God as far as I can tell. Just because God knows something is going to happen doesn't mean he makes it happen. It's simply human nature to just bob between peace and distress until the end of days. And God isn't going to force himself on that bobbing until that end. But even in the end, He doesn't stop us from doing distressing things, but he stops distress itself. God so respects free will. Even in the end, he'd rather take away the option of sin rather than forcing us to conform to his way alone. It's just something to remember when one wonders why such tensions exist in the world. But speaking of tensions, let's see how these kids' birth went in the next verse, which is... When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out reddish all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. Hairy, is what that means. Fun fact. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand grasped Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob, which means one who grabs by the heel, or supplanter. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The joys of having two rambunctious twin boys as your firstborns. I'm sure Isaac and Rebekah had their hands full with that. I actually wondered about their births, since it was a little odd. I wasn't sure if it was actually possible for a twin to hold on to the other twin's foot while they're being born like that. So I asked my aunt, who is a very smart midwife, by the way, and she did confirm it is possible, though a bit unlikely. Twins will either share a gestational sac, because they're not just floating around in someone's body. There's like a barrier to protect the organs and such. But twins are either going to share a sac if they're identical, or they get their own sacs if they're fraternal. Jacob and Esau were definitely fraternal since they looked so different. So it'd be harder for Jacob to grab Esau's heel while being born. But the sac, as my aunt informs me, are very thin, about as thin as saran wrap. So, given that they're already rambunctious kids and all the jostling that happens during pregnancy, it's very possible that the sacs ruptured, at least during the birthing process, and Jacob was able to grab Esau then. Or it could just be a figure of speech that Jacob came out immediately after Esau, on his heels, as it were. Or Jacob grabbed Esau's heels after the birth, as the verse doesn't actually really super specify that Jacob's hand was on Esau's heel while Esau was being born. I don't think it really matters one way or the other, but it's fun to think about. Speaking of fun facts, Jacob's name was the ancient equivalent of being called a trickster or rascal. The connotations of a heel grabber are kind of like our euphemism for pulling one's leg. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but Jacob certainly lived up to it nonetheless, as we'll see as we read on. So let's do that now. Okay, so next verse is... When the boys grew up, Esau was an able and skilled hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a quiet and peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved and favored Esau because he enjoyed eating his game, but Rebekah loved and favored Jacob. Now I don't mean to be that liberal, but it's so predictable that Rebekah prefers her quiet, homebody, second-born son, while Isaac prefers his super macho outdoorsman of a firstborn son. I'm sure both parents loved their kids equally, but it's kind of unavoidable that you'll like one more than the other sometimes. Nothing really wrong with that, as long as you're not obvious about it. So don't be obvious that you like one more than the other, because that messes them up. I don't know, in case you didn't know. Anyways, let's now continue to the last verse. And there's a bit more to unpack at the end here, so buckle up. The chapter ends with... Jacob had cooked reddish-brown lentil stew one day when Esau came from the field and was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a quick swallow of that red stuff there, because I am exhausted and famished." For that reason, Esau was also called Edom, which means red. So red stew, red hair, red body, and red was considered a macho color back then, so a lot of red things were associated with Esau. So Edom is an understandable nickname. So and moving on. So Jacob answered, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "Look, I am about to die, so of what use is this birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear an oath to me today that you are selling it to me for this food." So he swore an oath to him and sold him his birthright. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and he got up and went on his way. In this way Esau scorned his birthright. So no one really looks great in this instance. Sneaky snake Jacob saw his brother in need and thought to use this weakness for leverage. And Esau doesn't think very far ahead and trains his whole birthright for a bowl of soup and some bread. Birthrights, for those wondering, automatically go to the firstborn, and it usually means that they get double inheritance as well as being the heir patriarch of the family. It can sometimes mean being the next spiritual leader of the family as well. In those days, family units were usually like tribes, so like being the firstborn was like pretty important. It's like you're like next in line. It's like little mini kingdoms, you know. So most commentators seem to think for Isaac's family, at least, birthright would determine who would carry on the covenantal promise, like who gets to continue the messianic line as well. So it was extra important which of these two would get that. And I suppose, however, in the long run, it wouldn't really matter who got the covenant as long as everyone remained faithful to God, but it was still a pretty high honor. It's not entirely clear if that is in fact what Esau was giving up, but it is strong evidence for why God may have ultimately chosen Jacob over Esau to carry on the covenant. Even if that's not what the birthright gave, and I'm a little bit skeptical that it is, but even if it is, even if the birthright was not included in that, Esau being so flippant about it shows just how short-sighted and disrespectful he could be. God likely prefers people who get big picture ideas in the long run, ones that pursue and seek their honor over the apathetic. At the very least, Esau didn't seem the responsible sort, and being the ancestor of the Messiah would require some level of responsibility. Even though Jacob acquired the birthright through less than honorable means, it at least showed how much he revered it, to the point of tricking his own brother out of it, who didn't, it wasn't really even a trick. It was just, hey, give me your birthright. And he was like, yeah, sure, I don't care about this. So it at least shows that Jacob cared about the birthright enough to, like, obtain it from this person who does not care about it. It showed passion and ambition that seeks higher powers, which is better than plain apathy and pursuing only physical pleasures. So it's quite possible that God preferred Jacob's moxie over Esau's, considering this event. But going back to whether the covenant was a part of the birthright in the first place, some commentators would argue that Jacob would have been the chosen heir regardless of if he had the birthright or not. God had chosen him to carry on the messianic line before he was even born, so it was a bit silly and redundant for Jacob to trick Esau out of the birthright. And that may be so. God at the very least knew beforehand that Jacob would be the heir of the covenant, being all-knowing and all. Though keep in mind that the birthright wasn't just continuation of the covenant, if it was that at all, but also double inheritance and some political power. So there was like a monetary and political aspect to this as well. There's still no way to tell if Jacob wanted the birthright for those monetary reasons or for covenantal reasons, or even if he somehow knew that only one of them could carry on the covenant. Consider that both Jacob and Esau are descendants of Abraham, so it could be reasonably assumed that they'd both carry on the covenant, barring any major loss of faith or unforgivable acts, which may have been what happened to Esau, but we'll consider this when we get to the later chapters. For now, let's focus on this one event and how we should interpret it. When you're interpreting biblical stories, one thing to consider is that the Bible isn't strictly a history book. It's also got this literary edge to it. I wouldn't exactly call it historical fiction, exactly for obvious reasons, but oftentimes the stories of the Bible are occasionally exaggerated or detail stretched or minimized so as to promote a specific idea or concept by the writers. It's no different than when you're talking, like really classic examples when like there's like fishermen that's like talking about how big of a fish they got, what's the biggest fish they got, and sometimes they stretch it a little bit just to make it sound more impressive. Obviously the Bible's gonna have a lot more I can't think of the word, but good intentions, I guess, than just trying to make themselves look good. It's trying to promote that philosophy of truth, peace, and love, and all that fun stuff. But that it's like that kind of idea where they did catch a big fish, but like how big it was, what kind of fish, that can kind of maybe be smudged a little bit. Like details that don't really matter, but they kind of help to drive the point home of what the story is trying to make. So that's kind of the idea of it. I do personally believe that the stories of the Bible are all basically true in that respect, or at least that the meaning behind the stories are based in truth. But the Bible is meant to be used as a guide for life and represent the overarching view of the past, present, and future. There's just a message behind every story and that we're meant to get from it. And there's often different meanings depending on how you're reading it. It's not strictly historical. It's got some literary aspects to it as well. So all that to say, that one must also consider what message can be understood depending on the different ways of reading any given story. And if an interpretation doesn't align with the overall message of the Bible, it might not be a very good interpretation. So for this story, if Jacob didn't get the honor of continuing the messianic line until he tricked it out of Esau, the moral of the story would be that one doesn't just automatically receive honor from God simply because of who or what you are. You must vigorously pursue it and want it with all of your heart, and if you don't, you will lose it as Esau does. At the very least, someone who fights for God's blessing is better than someone who doesn't. If Jacob was the chosen heir for the covenantal promise to begin with, the moral of the story would be that God's blessings can't be won. He gives blessings to the ones who can best handle them and use them in the intended manner, regardless of what you do, though what you do is a reflection of why you were chosen. But either way, it's silly and a bit greedy to try to win something that you already have. At the very least, it's greedy to try to take prestige from others when you already have all the prestige that you need. If you have God's blessing, who cares if you have your dad's blessing and you get his money? You get riches in the kingdom of heaven, that kind of vibe. And if the birthright had no connection to the covenant, it's a straightforward story about how a short-sighted and flippant older brother got his double inheritance and title as patriarchal heir taken from him by his manipulative and scheming younger brother because he was hungry. Now, the younger brother is going to be a bit more secure in the future than the older one, so maybe probably one shouldn't focus so much on the current pangs and focus more on the long run. The end game is what matters most. This story in general gives us a glimpse into the character of these two brothers as well. So, so basically, just like a face value interpretation. So, of these three interpretations, which do you think aligns most with the wisdom and overarching theme of the Bible as a whole? I'll let you decide for yourself, partially because I think all these interpretations hold some biblical weight to them, so it's hard for me to say with any certainty either way, but I do kind of vibe with the second interpretation just a little bit more, only because I dislike the idea of tricking someone out of God's honor, and I think it's not really something you can win so simply, but I don't think that the other two are necessarily wrong either. I think I can kind of see how those kind of themes are in other places in the Bible as well. The third interpretation especially wasn't too far off either, in my opinion. It feels more reasonable and likely, at least. But, whatever speaks to your heart, I suppose. And just to clarify a little bit on Esau's behalf, he wasn't saying, I'm so hungry, I'll die if I don't eat, so just take my birthright. It was more of like I'm going to die eventually either way, so what's a birthright to me anyways? It's, I only care about now, and I'm hungry now, like, it's like that vibe of like, I don't care what possessions I get, I'm living in the now, because I'm gonna die one day, so nothing matters. Little nihilist, I guess. And to be fair to Esau, he might have thought that Jacob was joking about it, though you'd think he was serious when he makes you swear an oath. But oaths were taken very seriously back then. But remember, Jacob's the smart one, not Esau. Jacob also likely wasn't far from home, so Esau could have just walked there and gotten his own food. But Esau was apparently very tired after working the land all day, clearly not thinking straight and not wanting to move more than he already had. Again, Esau's not the smart one, Jacob is. But perhaps this was quick thinking on Jacob's part, or maybe he knew and planned to get the birthright from Esau this way. Maybe Jacob was in fact also joking at first, but when Esau so readily agreed to the demands, he leapt at the opportunity and made Esau swear an oath for it. Either way, it is the clever and quick-witted and far-sighted that get remembered in history, and the ones who live in the moment who get forgotten the most. And I guess it's up to you which you'd rather be. And on that solemn note is where we shall end this discussion. Feel free to leave any questions, comments, any needy or thankful prayer requests down below, and I will respond as I am able. But for now, let's move on to the prayer requests that we already have. Oh, let me grab my little prayer request book. Okay, so we're gonna pray for my cousin. So my cousin, she has a dead husband. That was a horrible way to put that sentence, but I started the sentence with she, and I couldn't think of another way to put that. But my cousin is grieving, and she does have a son to take care of still, so we're just going to pray for them, that they are continuing on the best that they can. We're also going to pray for Dr. Heiser and Trey from the Naked Bible podcast, because they are sick. I think Trey's fine, but Trey had COVID, but he might have like the after more permanent symptoms of COVID. after you get it. And Dr. Heiser has cancer, which is not fun either. So we're going to pray that they get better, or can at least handle the symptoms as best as they can. I'm also gonna, so from what I have gathered, my family members, last Bible study, a bunch of them had COVID. It seems like they recovered, so we're gonna thank God for that. And also, I'm gonna pray for Mia, because looking back at the Bible study last week, or the last 2 weeks, I guess, I realized I had actually forgotten to pray for her. I said that I would, and then I went on a tangent about my cousin giving birth, and then also for me, my mental status and spiritual status. So I'm gonna pray for her for reals this time. So we're gonna do that. And then for myself, I have been a bit depressed. I've been just like dealing with these like behavioral issues, and thinking about the future, and part of me wonders if I'm ever going to be able to I guess fix myself, heal, whatever the therapeutic word for that is. And I feel like the odds are kind of stacked against me. I mean, I guess I have to accept that I'm never going to be perfect, but I'd like to at least not be a social pariah, if at all possible. So I guess pray for that. And that's all I can think of. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay. So we're praying to God now. Hey God, how's it going? I wanted to ask that you forgive us of any iniquities, and if we are not aware of these iniquities, if you could kindly point those out to us so that we may correct them to the best of our abilities with your help and grace, that would be great. I'd also like to pray for my cousin. Pray that she and her son are coping with the loss of a beloved family member as best as they can. They seem to, last I heard, but grief is not a straight line. It's like a roller coaster. So I just pray that they're able to keep their sights on you to the best of their abilities. I'd also, in this prayer, like to point out that she does have a GoFundMe to help with like moving costs and like funeral and whatever's, and I just pray that people who can give do give. I think a lot of the times there are people who are like, oh, I can give, but it's like inconvenient or something. But like if you can give, it's not really that inconvenient, honestly. You could just do it. I'm just throwing that out there. Like you can just like do that. I just pray that you like put it on people's heart to like give what they can to this GoFundMe. Give joyfully and generously, because my cousin is awesome and she deserves all the support that she can get. I'd also like to pray for Dr. Heiser and Trey from the Naked Bible Podcast. I pray that Trey is not suffering from any long-term effects from COVID. I'd also like to pray for Dr. Heiser, that he's able to get over this whole cancer thing. But your will be done. If it's his time, it's his time. He doesn't seem too concerned about it, which I guess is a good mindset to have. But he's also kind of a cool guy, so it'd be cool if he could stay around. Just if you're wondering what our preference is, we would prefer for him to stay alive. But sometimes people die, so that's just it. It's everyone dies eventually. So if that's the case, I just pray that the transition is as seamless as possible, that they're able to find a replacement for the Naked Bible podcast well enough. It seems like they kind of already have some people. But from what I've heard, it doesn't seem like there's any negative turns for Dr. Heiser. So we just pray that that continues, that he doesn't have to get replaced, and he's going to get better, and he's going to have a great story to tell about how God saved him from cancer with the help of a very good medical team. So just pray that that's what happens, but, your will be done on that. I also like to pray for Mia. She seems to have disappeared for good this time, and I'm not entirely sure why. She might also be dead. She might actually be dead, because it's either that or I did something horrible, and I can't think of what horrible thing I could have done that would have caused her disappearance. So I kind of feel like she's just dead. So, I mean, whatever it is that she's going through, I pray that she goes through it with grace and humility, and with her sight set on you, and what it is that you need her to do to get through whatever she's getting through. If it is death, then I pray that you take care of her in this afterlife. I hope that she's like kicking it in heaven right now. But whatever it is, just I hope that she knows that there's some people that are still rooting for her, that at least you are still rooting for her, and I hope the best for her. So give her the best if and when possible. I also like to thank you for healing my family members of the COVID. I hope that none of them get long-term effects, especially my aunt, who is a little bit more in the risk area. And I think I have a family member too. But yeah, just thanks for getting them through that. Hope that none of them die from it. That would also be cool. But you do you again. I prefer if they don't die though, because death is not fun. But yeah, so thanks for that. And then as for myself, I mean, you know me. I've been very depressed lately. Well, not very depressed. I've had a nagging sensation in the middle part of my brain that I'm never going to get better, and everything's just always going to suck, and there's nothing I can really do to stop it. Or like I could probably stop it, but it's like really hard for me to do that, so I probably just won't, because it's too hard. So I don't know, I just pray that I don't know, maybe you do it for me. Is that an option? Can you just like fix me for me? Because I don't think I can do it based off my will alone. Like changing is hard. Especially when you're like dealing with like 20 years of trauma. And now you're like trying to experiment with psychiatric meds under the advisement of a doctor. But, it's still like a process to find the right medication and all that fun stuff. So I just, I don't know, it's nerve-wracking. It's very nerve-wracking right now. So I just pray that you give me the energy and, the fortitude? I don't know. Like, just help me to stick in there and pray that I, actually do the thing that I need to do. Do the thing that I need to do. And yeah, I think that's about it. So yeah, thanks for listening to our requests. You do you. And yeah, alright, cool. Amen. Bye. Alright, cool. I'm so good at prayer. So that's about it for the Bible study. I do like to end with a loud worship song, which I cannot play here because, again, copyright is a bitch. But for those on YouTube, if you go into the description, you'll find a link for loud worship. This one is extra fun, so I hope you enjoy it. And this is for loud worship, but it's one where it's like the opposite of quiet worship. Gasp, shock, what? The opposite of quiet worship is loud worship. Who would have guessed? But for this one, it's more like a move and groove. Get the blood pumping. Dance around. Get those endorphins and then adrenaline up. Just to end it all on a positive note. After talking about death and depression and how it's all hopeless. Let's listen to a bop after all that. So yeah, I hope you do that. Listen to the Loud Worship song. For those on Facebook, you can just scroll up and it should be right there. But yeah, do listen to the Loud Worship song. Okay, do it for me. Okay. Well, see you in like 2 weeks then. Okay. Bye.